I used to love night drives. There was something meditative about the empty roads, the rhythmic hum of the tires against the pavement, and the way the streetlights painted fleeting gold streaks across my windshield. After a long shift, I found peace in those quiet hours, just me, my music, and the road. But after what happened last summer, I don't drive at night anymore. It started when I picked up a new job at a distribution center about an hour from my apartment. The pay was decent, but the hours were brutal, 3 p.m. to midnight, 5 days a week. That meant a long, lonely drive home every night, a stretch of highway cutting through dense, unbroken forest. No houses, no streetlights, just miles of asphalt swallowed by trees. At first, I didn't mind. The isolation was oddly calming. One night, just past 12:30 a.m., I noticed my fuel gauge dipping lower than I was comfortable with. Normally, I planned ahead, but I had been distracted that day, and now I was dangerously close to empty. Relief hit me when I spotted a gas station ahead, a tiny, run-down place with a single ancient pump glowing under the fluorescent flicker of a half-dead sign. It wasn't a chain, just some nameless roadside relic. I pulled in, the tires crunching against gravel, and stepped out into the thick summer air. Everything was silent. The gas station itself was closed, the store dark, metal shutters pulled over the windows, but the pump still worked. As I swiped my card, I noticed how isolated it was. No other cars, no visible houses or buildings. Just trees. That's when I heard it. A low humming. At first, I thought it was the pump, the old machinery vibrating against the quiet night. But no, it was different. Softer. Human. A slow, drawn-out tune, like someone humming a lullaby just beyond my vision. I turned my head toward the sound, peering into the dense forest behind the gas station. The trees were tall, looming, their trunks disappearing into the darkness. The humming continued, steady and unbroken. My stomach twisted. Then, a snap. A branch breaking underfoot. I froze. My eyes strained against the dark, searching for movement. Nothing. Just the shadows shifting with the breeze. The gas pump clicked off, making me flinch. The sudden silence made the humming seem even louder. I grabbed the nozzle, shoved it back into the holder, and turned toward my car. That's when I saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, half hidden in the shadows. It was tall unnaturally, so its limbs too long, its stance too still. My breath caught in my throat. The humming stopped. For a moment, nothing moved. The air was thick with silence. Then, it shifted. Not like a person stepping forward. It was wrong. 1 second, it was near the tree line. The next, it was closer. No sound, no motion. Just closer. I stumbled backward, fumbling for my car door. My fingers slipped against the handle before I yanked it open and threw myself inside. Heart pounding, I jammed the keys into the ignition and twisted hard. The headlights flooded the lot, washing over the trees. There was nothing there. I didn't stop to think. My foot slammed on the gas, and the car lurched forward, tires kicking up loose gravel as I sped away. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting, dreading to see something chasing me. But the lot was empty. The gas station, the trees, the road behind me silent and undisturbed. I drove the rest of the way home with my pulse hammering in my ears. It had to be my imagination. A trick of the dark. Sleep deprivation playing games with my mind. That's what I told myself. But when I pulled into my apartment parking lot and turned off the engine, I heard it again. The humming. Not distant this time. Close. Right outside my car window. And when I finally gathered the courage to turn my head, something was standing there. Story 2. There are some places you just don't stop. The ones that seem forgotten, frozen in time, barely clinging to life on the edges of old highways and abandoned towns. I should have known better. I should have kept driving. It was past midnight, and I had been on the road for nearly 18 hours straight. My father's funeral had drained me more than I thought possible, and the exhaustion weighed heavy on my bones. I was too far from home, too tired to keep my eyes open, but the nearest town was still an hour away. I needed rest. That's when I saw the sign. Clearview Motel, vacancy. The sign buzzed weakly in the dark, its neon glow barely cutting through the thick night air. The place was just off the highway, a row of single-story rooms stretching under a long strip of flickering fluorescent lights. There were no other cars in the lot. A bad feeling settled in my gut, but my exhaustion drowned it out. I told myself it didn't matter. I just needed a few hours of sleep before I got back on the road. I pulled in and walked to the front office, a tiny shack attached to the first unit. The glass window was thick with grime, a faded, open sign barely visible behind it. I rang the bell. Nothing. I rang it again, harder this time. Finally, movement. A shadow stirred behind the counter, slow and deliberate. An old man, thin and hunched, shuffled forward. His skin was waxy, his eyes pale and glassy, like he had just woken up from a long, deep sleep. Room for the night? I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. He nodded. No greeting, no smile. Just a slow, shaky movement as he slid a key across the counter. Room 6. $40, he muttered. I handed him the cash and took the key. As our fingers brushed, his skin felt unnaturally cold, like something long dead. He held onto the money for a second too long, his milky eyes locked onto mine. You'll want to keep your door locked, he said. I forced a nod and stepped back. The hallway to my room smelled like damp carpet and stale cigarettes. The walls were yellowed, peeling at the corners. My room was no better. A dimly lit space with an old bed, a single nightstand, and a bolted-down dresser. A cheap painting hung above the bed, its colors smeared like bruises on canvas. I double-checked the lock on the door. Then I locked it again. Collapsing onto the mattress, I barely had time to kick off my shoes before sleep took me. And then, knock, knock, knock. The sound jolted me awake. My heart slammed against my ribs. I sat up, the room still thick with sleep. I wasn't dreaming. There it was again. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, rhythmic, too deliberate to be an accident. I swallowed hard, glancing at the door. The latch was still in place. The handle didn't move. Maybe the old man needed something. I forced myself out of bed and approached the door, my breath uneven. I peeked through the peephole. Nothing. The parking lot was empty. Just the flickering neon sign and the stretch of empty highway beyond. A chill ran down my spine. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then, shaking my head, I turned back toward the bed. Knock, knock, knock. From inside the room, my lungs seized. I whipped around, every muscle locking in place. The closet door. It had been shut when I came in. I was sure of it. Now, it was open, just an inch, just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness beyond. Something shifted inside. My feet refused to move. My breath hitched in my throat. Then, a hand slid through the gap. Pale, too long. Fingers spider-thin, nails jagged and cracked. The hand pressed against the wood, pushing the door open another inch. My body finally obeyed. I stumbled backward, my hands scrambling for something. Anything I could use as a weapon. The closet door creaked open. The thing inside, it wasn't stepping out. It was crawling. Its limbs unfolded awkwardly, like it wasn't used to them. The light from the flickering lamp barely illuminated its shape, a thin, twisted form, moving in jerky, unnatural motions. And its face. No, it didn't have a face. Just smooth, featureless skin where eyes, a nose, a mouth should have been. It stopped, crouched in the doorway, its head tilted as if it were listening. And then it moved. Not forward, not toward me. It climbed up the wall. Its limbs bent the wrong way as it scaled the ceiling, moving soundlessly, its faceless head twisting unnaturally. I bolted. I didn't grab my bag. I didn't grab my keys. I just ran. The motel door nearly ripped off its hinges as I tore into the hallway. The old man was standing at the front office window, watching. You saw it, he said. Not a question. I didn't stop. I didn't answer. I sprinted to my car, my hands shaking so badly I fumbled with the keys. When the engine finally roared to life, I floored it. My tires screeched against the pavement as I sped out of the lot, the neon glow of the motel sign disappearing in my rearview mirror. I drove for hours, straight through until dawn, stopping only when I reached a gas station in the next state. I sat there in the car, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It was over. That's what I told myself. Until I finally looked in the rearview mirror and saw the closet door in the back seat, cracked open. Just an inch. Story 3. There are 2 types of silence in the world. The kind that comforts you, like when you're lying in bed, wrapped in warm blankets, and the only sound is the distant hum of the world outside. And then there's the other kind. The silence that isn't empty, but filled with something watching. Waiting. I learned the difference the night I stayed in that house. It was an old Victorian rental, tucked away in the woods, far from anything resembling civilization. A friend of mine, Nolan, had gotten the place for cheap on some app. He was always looking for ways to save money. even if it meant staying in places that looked like they belonged in horror movies. "You can't beat the price," he had said, grinning as he sent me the listing. Creepy as hell, but whatever. We'll make it a weekend. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I agreed. A weekend getaway with a few friends, drinking, playing cards, unwinding. I figured it would be harmless. It wasn't. The first sign that something was wrong came the moment we arrived. The house loomed over us, its dark wooden exterior weathered and cracked, like it had been left to rot for decades. The windows were tall and narrow, staring down at us like empty eyes. A wraparound porch sagged under its own weight, the wooden boards creaking in the wind. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I felt it. The silence. Not peaceful, not still. Heavy, like the trees, the house, the very air around us was waiting. Nolan, of course, ignored it. He grabbed his bags and jogged up the steps, jingling the keys as he went. The others, Lena, Mike, and Jules, followed, laughing about how it looked like something out of a ghost story. It didn't feel funny to me. Inside, the house was worse. Dust clung to every surface. The furniture was covered in white sheets, except for a single rocking chair in the corner of the living room. Its cushions were worn down, as if someone had sat in it for years, rocking back and forth. The air smelled stale, thick with something rotting just beneath the surface. "Place is a dump," Mike muttered, pulling the sheet off a couch. "But whatever, it's only 2 nights." We unpacked, set up our sleeping arrangements, and started drinking. For a while, it was fine. The tension from earlier faded, and the house felt less oppressive with the sound of laughter and clinking bottles filling the space. Until the sun went down. That's when the knocking started. Soft, rhythmic, coming from upstairs. We all froze. The laughter died instantly. Nolan furrowed his brows. "Win." Jules shook her head. "Wind doesn't knock." The sound came again. A slow, deliberate knock. Knock. Knock against the floorboards above us. The master bedroom. "Maybe someone broke in," Lena whispered. Mike, always the idiot, grabbed a poker from the fireplace and started toward the stairs. Only one way to find out. We followed. I don't know why. Something about not being alone made it feel safer, even if every instinct in my body screamed for me to get the hell out. The hallway upstairs was lined with closed doors, dust swirling in the air as we moved. The master bedroom was at the end, its door cracked open just enough to see the darkness inside. Mike nudged it with the poker. It swung open, slow and deliberate, like something inside had been waiting for us. The room was empty, but the rocking chair in the corner, it was moving. Not fast, just barely, as if someone had just stood up from it. No one spoke. Then Jules let out a shaky laugh. "Okay, that's enough." "Who moved it?" Nobody answered, because none of us had been up here before. A bang from behind us. The door at the other end of the hall slammed shut. Lena gasped. Mike cursed under his breath. We ran. We didn't even bother checking the room. We bolted back down the stairs, the old wood groaning under our weight. The silence was different now. Not just heavy. Alive. Something else was here. We locked the doors. Checked every window. Made sure everything was shut. No one slept that night. Every few hours, we heard it. A single creak upstairs. A whisper of movement. A click as if a door handle was being tested. But nothing ever came down. Nothing ever showed itself. By morning, we packed our things in record time. Nolan tried to laugh it off, saying it was just an old house settling. None of us believed him. I was the last to leave. As I stepped onto the porch, I looked back one final time. And through the second-floor window, behind the glass. The rocking chair was moving. And this time, something was sitting in it. Story 4. Some roads don't show up on maps. That should have been my first warning. It was late September when my girlfriend, Rachel, and I decided to take a road trip. We had both been drowning in work, and a weekend escape into the mountains sounded like exactly what we needed. Fresh air, a cozy cabin, no cell service, just the two of us and the open road. The drive started off beautiful. The leaves had just begun to change, bright reds and oranges setting the hills on fire as we wove through the countryside. We had a playlist going, snacks between us, the kind of carefree energy that only comes when you know you're about to have a perfect weekend. Then, we missed our exit. It wasn't a big deal at first. GPS recalculated, offering an alternate route that took us through back roads and side streets. But as the miles stretched on, the paved roads turned to gravel, then dirt. The trees grew taller, thicker, blotting out what little daylight was left. And then, the signal disappeared. Rachel frowned at her phone. No service. I glanced at mine. Same. We kept driving. The road narrowed. The trees pressed in closer. I slowed down, gripping the wheel tighter. The air felt wrong somehow. Too still, too heavy. Are we sure this is right? Rachel asked, glancing at the GPS screen, which had frozen. I nodded, though doubt gnawed at the back of my mind. I think so. If we just keep going. Then we saw it. A house. Not a cabin, not a barn. A house, standing alone in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees so dense they seemed to swallow it whole. It wasn't abandoned. The porch light was on. Rachel sat up. What the hell? I slowed the car to a crawl. The road didn't go past the house. It ended at it. There was no turn-off, no driveway leading anywhere else. Just this impossibly placed house and the dying road beneath our tires. My skin crawled. I put the car in reverse, intending to turn around, but the moment I did, the porch light went out. Rachel gasped. Did they just? The darkness swallowed the house whole. My hands were sweating as I struggled to maneuver the car back onto the road. But the path was narrow, the trees pressing in on all sides. The more I backed up, the more the branches scraped against the windows, closing in like skeletal fingers. And then Rachel screamed. I barely had time to register the sound before I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road behind us. Pale, unmoving, watching. I slammed the brakes so hard my chest nearly hit the wheel. What the fuck is that? Rachel was gripping my arm, her nails digging into my skin. My mouth was dry. I couldn't answer. The figure didn't move. It stood at the edge of the headlights, just out of reach of clarity. Then it tilted its head. Not a normal tilt. Not the way a person moves. Too far. Too unnatural. Like its neck was bending wrong. Like it was listening to something we couldn't hear. My pulse thundered in my ears. We're leaving. Right now. I threw the car into drive and floored it. The wheels spun against the dirt for a terrifying second before gripping, and we lurched forward. Rachel was shaking, twisting in her seat to look behind us. It's still there, she whispered. I couldn't look. I wouldn't. The road was gone now, nothing but uneven ground and the shadows of the trees stretching long under the headlights. I didn't care. I didn't stop. We drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably minutes. Finally, the road returned. Pavement. A street sign. Civilization. I don't remember getting back to town. I only remember the silence, the way Rachel's breath came in short, shaky gasps beside me. When we finally pulled into a gas station, we sat in the car for a long time, neither of us speaking. Then Rachel whispered, "Check your phone." I did. The GPS was working again. I zoomed out, traced our route. There was no road, no alternate route, and no house, just untouched forest where we had just come from. Rachel let out a shaky laugh, but there was no humor in it. So, where the hell did we just go? I didn't have an answer. We never found that house again. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night, deep in the woods, my headlights catch something in the trees. A pale figure, tilting its head, watching. Story 5. There are things in the woods that don't belong. I used to laugh at people who were scared of the dark. I'd go camping alone, take midnight hikes, wander through trails with only a flashlight and my thoughts. The wilderness was my second home. I knew how to move through it, how to listen, how to respect it. But that was before the night I saw it. Now, I don't go into the woods after dark. It happened last fall. I had taken a week off work and driven up to my uncle's old hunting cabin, deep in the Appalachian woods. The place had been in my family for years, though it was mostly used for storage now. No electricity, no running water, just 4 walls, a roof, and the trees pressing in from all sides. Perfect solitude. The first few nights were peaceful. I spent my days hiking, chopping wood, sitting by the creek with a fishing line in the water. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn chill that makes your lungs feel clean. But then, on the 4th night, the knocking started. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. The fire in the wood stove had burned down to glowing embers, casting just enough light for me to see my breath in the cold air. Then, knock, knock, knock. Slow, rhythmic. Someone was at the door. I sat up, my heart hammering. There was no one else out here. The nearest town was 30 miles away. The only other cabin was abandoned, half a mile down the old logging road. I reached for my flashlight and hesitated. Then, knock, knock, knock. A little louder this time. I swallowed hard and moved toward the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Nothing, just silence. I flicked on the flashlight, took a deep breath, and yanked the door open. No one was there. The cold night air pressed against my skin, carrying the distant rustling of trees. The forest was empty. Still, I stepped onto the porch, sweeping my flashlight over the clearing. My truck was parked where I left it. The dirt path leading into the woods was untouched. Then I saw them. Footprints, leading out of the woods, stopping at my door. But there were no footprints leading away. My stomach clenched. I slammed the door shut, threw the lock, and grabbed the rifle from the rack above the fireplace. I barely slept that night, my ears straining for any sound, my pulse loud in my skull. Morning came, weak sunlight creeping through the trees. I stepped outside, half expecting to see more tracks. But the footprints were gone. The dirt in front of my cabin was smooth, untouched, as if nothing had ever been there. I told myself I imagined it, that I had dreamed it, that the wind had erased the prints overnight. I went about my day, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. That night, I locked the door early, kept the rifle close, and just as I was starting to drift off, knock, 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 my breath caught. Then, knock, 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 from the window. I turned my head slowly. The glass was dark, reflecting the dim glow of the firelight. I couldn't see outside, but something was out there, watching, waiting. I gripped the rifle, forced myself to move toward the window. My hands were shaking. I raised the flashlight. A face, right against the glass. Too pale, too long. Its mouth wasn't right, stretched wide, lips peeled back over teeth that weren't human. And its eyes, it didn't have any, just two gaping holes where they should have been. I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair. My breath hitched in my throat. Then, the thing tilted its head, slow, curious, like it was listening. My fingers fumbled for the rifle. I raised it, aimed at the window, but it was gone. The moment I blinked, it vanished. I didn't sleep that night, didn't move, just sat there, gripping the rifle, waiting for the sun to rise. At first light, I threw my things into my truck and left. I didn't check the footprints. I didn't check the window. I just drove. I haven't been back since. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world is silent, I hear it. Knock, knock, knock.